strongest impression from here, if I start rather generally, is that there is a kind of a window of opportunity for research infrastructure collaboration, and that it's a lot of different demands in different research fields. I don't think that all research infrastructure fits all. We have everything from like large investments like the ESS and Max IV to the establishment of registers, which is also a big one, to smaller research infrastructure ideas and ideas on different aspects of that, like education. I think that it has become obvious that in most of these fields we need to cooperate, and it's added value by cooperation. And it's basically because research infrastructure is expensive, and also because it's such a prerequisite for excellent research and knowledge.
So I think, Eva, you started the previous session by asking if something has happened during the past 5 years. I think indeed we have seen very nice examples of so, but I think we are still far from exploring the full potential of Nordic collaboration. So there is things to do in the future. One has to remember, though, that science is really something that which is seldom limited to a specific region, for instance, the Nordic region. So we also have to act, of course, in a global scene, European, etc. I think that when we select collaborations, we should have some criteria for that. And to me, the two most important ones for Nordic collaborations is Nordic added value and excellence in science. Those should be used always when we talk about Nordic collaborations. I think also we have to prioritize. We have seen here today from the different thematic groups, there are a number of examples where we could collaborate. But we have to prioritize. There is always a kind of overhead cost by starting collaborations. Then there is, of course, a long-term payoff, but we cannot handle too many initiatives at the same time. So we have to be a bit restrictive there. I agree with Gunnel that it's different countries have different interests in different areas of science. So this concept of variable geometry is really important to include when we discuss collaborations. Should I mention a few topics that I think have been so obvious here? It's training and education. Everybody speaks about that. It's good also from the financing point of view because that's relatively cheap to support. And another thing is these umbrella organizations, Nordic fora for the scientists to meet and discuss issues. And again, something quite important, and we don't have to put too much money into that. If I should take few examples where I think there are really fantastic opportunities, ESS and Max IV to me are obvious, and also research related to register, and maybe e-science in general, everything from HPC to big data is something that I think really we should start to focus on.
Thank you. And Peter?
Yes. Is it open?
Yes.
My strongest impression, maybe I should start to say that the keynote speeches gives a lot of impression, and that's what it's all about, I think. What are we actually doing in research infrastructures globally and also in a Nordic way? That's the weak way to answer. So now I will come to my conclusions, actually. Eva pointed at it earlier this afternoon, and Lars Börjesson started yesterday with the meeting from 2008, where he resumed what was actually mentioned at that time. And one of the things was that research infrastructures should come out of a bottom-up process. So have we come in a way today? Yes, it's not bottom-up, not always. It's also top-down. We have ESS, it's certainly top-down, and at least in Denmark, and not a bottom-up. We have a lot of research infrastructures that is bottom-up, But what we also have to take into consideration in the future is that research is going through a development. In earlier days, it was one single scientist that was the key issue. Then we have a development with research groups. We had institutions, maybe universities, centers of excellence, but what we will see in the future is global collaborations, and they will also ask for research infrastructure and be what do we call it? An interested group. So we will have top down, we will have bottom up, and we will have sidewards things coming in, and we will have to prioritize together. And therefore, I think also in a Nordic sense, we will have to not make policies or common roadmaps or anything like that, but we'll have to have white papers, discussion papers, put people together coming from all these interested groups, and maybe Norforsk has a role there, but also other people. We cannot point at one and say, you have to do the work. It's a common responsibility for all involved. Another impression that I've seen, I've got from this conference is that we have, of course, heard the word prioritization, but we have not heard the word where you prioritize in a way where you close down things. And there is really a limited amount of money for this, so you have to prioritize also by closing down things. Not to point specifically at one research infrastructure, but I'll do it just the same. The Nordic Optical Telescope, there's discussions about that. Is that really one thing we have to prioritize forever? At the same time where we opens up for new telescopes, ELT, ALMA has just opened, we have the SKA projects and so on. And who is going to take the responsibility for that decision? If I do it as coming from the ministry, I will be shot. So what I ask for is that also some sort of responsibility in the research communities about this, that we could help each other. And a last point is in this round. Next year, my division will pay out around 700 million Danish crowns for research infrastructures. But that sounds impressively, but most of the money is bound for memberships and so on that we can not leave, at least not for the moment. So we have a limited amount of money for new research infrastructures. And therefore, we have invited the universities to collaborate with us so they have to do their part of the financing if there should be new research infrastructures. Actually, it will be a condition for our point of view, and it is also a condition that several universities in Denmark are going together. We will not finance research infrastructures which are only in the interest of one or two universities. And that's of course because of the lack of money, and to do so, the universities have to have strategies and they have to have money. I heard earlier today in a session that the universities do not have money. I know they have money because one, I will not mention the university, but at least one Danish university had an internal call for inter-faculty projects with 500 million, this year. It could have been 250 million for that and 250 million for infrastructure. But so I call for responsibility for universities to make these prioritizations, to cooperate in the financing, and also to cooperate when we have to close down things. Thank you.
Thank you. Eva, please.
Thank you. I have been thinking about the research infrastructure ecosystem in Nordic countries, and what is the visibility of Nordic areas in global sense or in European sense. And I wonder how we could benefit of existing national nodes to S3 projects or ERICS or in global research infrastructures. What we are doing to maximize that, the benefit for research community. And I think that we need at the Nordic level to make a kind of laboratory or serial workshops for coordinators for hosting national nodes or hosting international research infrastructures, how to operate, manage, and how to give services to researchers in a way that really Nordic research will and areas will be visible in the world. And we all Nordic countries, we have national roadmaps, and I think that in many countries we are also having kind of surveys on existing ones. And that gives a tool for build up on clusters or try to get European funds for Nordic collaboration between existing research infrastructures. I know that the S3 process and the build up on research infrastructure that is international level, it requires a long process, and many research communities, they are very eager to build up something or to take position to host something. And I think that to be realistic, we have to notice that we need many steps to go there. And I think that the Nordic collaboration and partners can help each other to be stronger. That's the first impressions to me. And I think that Nordforsk may be one element to help in this process to get more visibility of Nordic research infrastructures and how to manage these. Okay?
Well, to your question, main take-home message. It's of course difficult to come up with only one, and in particular, before I come to the one and single, I would like to emphasize on. I would also remind everybody about what the excellent keynote speaker Mats Melby reminded us about this morning. About this is not only about research policies, but it is also about common policies on ethics, in personal sensitive data, etc. And that's somehow an even broader question than only research policies. But that being said, I think in many ways, for me, the main take-home message came from one of the first presentations, the one by Gunnel Gustafsson yesterday afternoon, when she more or less concluded, as far as I remember, that saying something like, we need a common Nordic policy on research infrastructures. And I think that's pretty correct, or at least we need to align it better than what it presently is. And at least two keywords within that has to do with coming up with more common ways of thinking concerning how we fund operational costs. I can elaborate on that further on in the debate if time permits. But instead of doing that now, I will also mention one other key word that I think is important a kind of important part of the foundation of such a policy, and that has to do with the key word leadership. And we do have seen some very good examples during this conference on leadership. But I also think that those we see here are the very best. Otherwise, they would not have been invited, perhaps. But that being said, I think we need to trigger some more, and there is a potential for triggering some more of these very good bottom-up initiatives, where the providers of research infrastructures really want to specialize and to become complementary to colleagues and infrastructures in the other country. And to accomplish that, we need to do something in the incentive structure, making people and these leaders to feel successful when they do so, when they find out this is how I provide my infrastructure and specialize it. And the toolbox I'm going to provide to the research community is broader than the one I have at home. It has also some elements in one or several of the other countries. I think there are some challenges here, broadly speaking, although we have seen some very good examples on this during this conference. Thank you so far.
Yes. Well, I would like to start by thanking the organizers for an excellent conference. For me at least, and I know I speak for the Icelandic participation, which is 3 people, that it's been excellent, and we've learned a lot. I think the keynote speakers have been excellent, and as well as the interventions from the shorter ones have been excellent actually. I think for me at least, I realized how extensive yet it is actually. Today the cooperation between the Nordic countries is already actually, and it seems that we have advanced quite far in the last at least 5 years or through the years, and I trust that Nordforsk has had something to do with that in stimulating further cooperation, although of course the research councils play a bigger role. So my take-home message is more work at home in prioritizing. We have been busy just keeping our head above the water the last 5 years in a way, but still we need to do our homework in prioritizing and emphasize certain areas. I think one of the things we need to keep in mind is we need to work at the highest level in the ranking. Marco, for example, mentioned being from individual towards the international cooperation, but still I think it can be important to work Nordic as Nordic knots within that international cooperation. So since I think those items like trust and closeness, etc., being able to work together is a key element actually in stimulating work at home. But we have a long way to go, so I hope that this kind of work will continue, and I hope Nordforsk, and that's a later question, will stimulate that. But of course the research councils they cooperate as well individually. I hope that we will proceed with that. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of interesting things came up. I would like to move forward to the second question because it relates very well to something that Peter said. The dark side of collaborating, the common responsibility for all involved, which has to do with the sharing of resources, which also relates to the cry out for e-science in e-infrastructures that has been raised during the whole conference. I would like to share with you a comment came from Uni, something that came up at the NAIC steering board meeting the other day. There was a long discussion on how to set about cost-effective sharing of HPC resources in Norden. And it was then decided that the national e-infra providers jointly should formulate a white paper a discussion paper, which then will be submitted to scrutiny for the funders and other stakeholders. Is this a good model? It was raised by Peter. Could it be used for data sharing, interoperability in health and welfare, climate and environment, and why not for MAX4 and ESS infrastructure? And could a number of such white papers be an efficient way forward? A complement to piloting, which is another way forward facilitated by Nordforsk. I would like to open up for any of you to answer this question, or number of questions perhaps, if you are interested in any of you. Yes. Do you pass the mic to Damwood?
Well, as a member of the steering committee for the NAIC, I should be very careful to say too much about the processes going on there, in the sense that I'm on the wrong side of the table. but still a few comments though. I think, first of all, that e-infrastructure, well, e-science is part of that, of course, which is mainly your question, but at least e-infrastructure being important for the topic for NAIC. That's a field in which the Nordic countries has come pretty far. It has been advancing, and just a few years ago it was mainly, or at least through the predecessor for NAIC, it was the Nordic Data Grid Facility. It was mainly focused on data from CERN and coordinated those in an excellent way. But since NAIC was founded, we have seen new collaborations coming up in this field, and that's quite fine. I think one of the key challenges we have here is to figure out more precisely how we share the work between the national providers of e-infrastructure and what we are doing on the Nordic level. I think we have still more to do there, and this is also pretty much what the discussions in the NAIC board is about. Although we don't have the key answer yet, otherwise those discussions had finished. White paper for other fields. Yes, of course, I think that could be very interesting in many of the fields. But one of the problems I see, at least sometimes when we get up this kind of discussion papers, is that they contain everything. It's a kind of yes, both is the kind of answer they give. We would like this, and we would like this, and we would like the third. And then we are back to what my Danish colleague said. How do we prioritize? How do we come up with a suggestion? Well, from, for example, Norway, we are not doing this, but we are doing that instead, and similarly with other countries. So there are some challenges there in these white paper formulation processes, I think.
I think I will comment a little more generally. I mean, we host e-science and e-science infrastructure, and I think that works well for the time being, and I think it has been also a very good process to reach where we are now, involving both the Nordic Council of Ministers, the different countries, and also bottom-up in many ways. So I think comparing the processes for how to establish initiatives like that, really it's a good example of something that we could look into and share in other fields. But I also would say that when I said this about we need a Nordic research infrastructure policy, I think it could be misunderstood, and I think it's very important to understand what a white paper is, what a roadmap is. We swing around with a lot of words in this. I think that, in my mind, we would need a common view on how to go about to prioritize. This is the first thing in such a policy map. The second would be to start discussing, in a real sense, funding. Because I think funding, even though we have touched upon it, is still the key issue, in the sense that it is, even within the countries, so fragmented. It might well be that we agree on lifting something up, but then the person in charge of it doesn't have that pocket. It's in another pocket. We even heard that from Mats in the register research discussion. So I think that there is actually a need for a top-down thinking about the importance of this. So we are not stuck in this long dragged processes to find out from where the money should come. And so I think that these processes is one thing, and they should be step by step. But I also think it's a need for a high-level political commitment to actually do something. Like if you contrast the birth of e-science with the birth of the top-level research initiative, it was very, very a different way. The e-science was much more bottom-up. But the good thing with starting this climate research, climate, energy, and the environment within the top-level research initiative was actually that the Prime Minister said it should be started. I was sitting on Sven's table, side of the table at that time, and I know the enormous discussions within Sweden. But there was commitment, and then all these pockets in a very funny way were opened up. I think this is what is needed. It's something that the research community wants, but it's also something that it needs to be a much more high-level discussion on how to finance this. If we don't do that, we will be stuck, I think. So this is what I mean with a policy that is a common policy. Of course, this could include national infrastructures or global links to one of the Nordic countries and all that. But at least we need to discuss both the process and also the increased ambitions in this field and the crucial importance of it for added value. So I think the other thing is that not to confuse how you organize this with how you fund it. Of course, Nordforsk is very small in terms of funding. If you compare it with universities or funders, it's like a drop in the sea. But I think what we can do is that we can organize this, but we need co-funding. And in order to do all the things that you have asked us to do here, I think we need this commitment of some kind in the Nordic countries. So that's what I mean with a Nordic research, infrastructure research policy.
Thank you, Gunnel. Would you like to comment, Sven?
Well, I have a more specific comment concerning e-science. As it was mentioned by Kenneth Ruud yesterday, the importance of software development. And I also heard that actually today from the ex-metal side during the materials and molecules session that methodology development is important. These two issues, I think, is somewhere between research and research infrastructure, but nevertheless, they are really crucial. And it might be that we don't, as a funders, have the right instruments to support these kind of activities. From a scientific point of view, they cannot compete with those that actually do research and publish a lot of papers. So it's something that I think we should think about, and that applies to both to e-science and to ex-metal science as well.
And what comes to the prioritization and what we can do, you certainly can guess that ESFRI will update the roadmap probably 2016. And if we wanted to have a role in that process, that means that we need to make a prioritization at Nordic level if we wanted to have a role in certain initiatives. For example, what I understand from the ESFRI process, that next update version, you have to have already at least 3 countries behind the proposal, and also the funding, kind of funding commitments. So that means that we need really to have a common policy to get these 3 countries, they might be, of course, they might be also some other countries than only Nordic countries, but it will be very tough thing next round. So in that sense, I support the kind of Nordic policy discussions to be started.
Yes, please, Peter.
Yes, just a short comment. Of course, we should work together in the Nordic sense. We are also now discussing how we should approach ESFRI. There is a meeting the 6th of December where ESFRI have to prioritize which process infrastructures that's going to have a one-off implementing financing from Horizon 2020. And even that is difficult because we have not the same roadmaps. And why do we not have the same roadmaps? Because we have different research structures. We have different communities on the different universities. So it is difficult. So what I don't foresee that we will have a policy a real policy on the Nordic research infrastructure. We have to realize that we are on a European scene and that we cooperate with different countries in different connections. But what we could do, and that was what I opened up with saying, is that we could discuss with each other where we have the same views and then go for that and use our efforts to really put force into to that and not everything else. We should not try to make a artificial joint Nordic common approach for research infrastructure because we will never get it. And just a comment, not to be negative, Gunnar, but the top level research initiative, I think it maybe not one-off, but you will not see that as a common approach for research infrastructure, at least not as I see it.
Can I just say that I don't want something artificial, of course. But to take one example, I think we all seem to agree that we need to build register research. And that is something that we can do here because we have these data sets. It will cost money. It will probably be very important. I think that in these infrastructures are very different. But in order to accomplish something like that, we need blessing from funders at a very high level, and maybe also kind of reallocation or additional funds from ministries to the funders or to the universities or to cooperation, or in what way. I think that this is the kind of issues, especially when we start something new. We should also be able to close things, of course. But when we start something new, and we cannot always just keep to what we have and try to use that, and that is important. But if we see the opportunities here, there are obstacles also. But I think that the opportunities will win in the long run. There are so many good examples now of what can be done, and also great future ideas on how you can solve some of the, I think, most crucial questions like ethical issues. We heard in one of the groups here earlier today some creative, future-oriented ideas about that. This is the kind of thing that I don't think can be done without commitment in the long term, because we also need sustainability. And in order for this to happen, we need e-science and we need e-infrastructure, because when this kind of facility, you may even call it, is built, it will become e-science, and e-infrastructure is needed to access it and to keep the quality and so on.
Thank you, Gunnel. Anyone else from the panel would like to comment on any of the issues that have been raised so far? We have actually been touching upon several of the questions that I raised at the beginning, so you have been very good, panel. Are there any comments from the floor at this point, perhaps? Yes, do we have a mic on the floor here?
I would like to be really provocative and let us assume that we have agreed upon having one center in each of the Nordic countries. And let's assume that we have MaxLab in Sweden as being the photon science part. Let's assume that we have nanofabrication in Norway, e-health in Denmark, etc. If we have agreed upon this, how could you make it happen?
Who would like to start? Yes, pass the mic down to... Okay.
Actually, we have done a lot to make it happen because we start with funding what we are doing nationally. The Biobank in Denmark, as Mads Milby has presented, is actually co-financed by our ministry and as research infrastructure. But that is why the answer must be that I don't think we can have a policy. I have said that before, and therefore you cannot ask, at least me, to say how should I finance what is going on a general Nordic agreement, because it's not like that. What you have to see, the situation is rather chaotic, as a matter of fact. Not in a negative sense, but you have a lot of interests, you have a lot of funders. It's not only the ministry, it's not only the universities, it's also private funds, it's several things. And what you need is that someone or several go together and try to facilitate or to be a catalyze the process. And when you have a success in a Nordic sense, ESS or something else, is actually because that has happened. A real top-down and a real bottom-up, it doesn't exist. It's a top-down is also initiated by researchers that know the minister or something like that, and then you have something that interplays and interacts in a way, and suddenly you see a track. And so you don't have to ask me. I will participate in conferences and meetings, and my employees will go to workshops wherever you ask us, and we'll try to pick what is interesting and to see what we can do to get a common understanding. And then we will go to when we have seen something that could be interesting, then we will ask the universities, and we have made a new advisory committee for the agency where we ask all the universities, are you interested in this? And then we have the responses from the universities, but we don't have responses from the private funds. Then we have to go to them, and it's a complicated process. You cannot put these 6 people together in one room and say, make a policy and make a roadmap and make it last forever. We have all made our roadmaps, and we know, I think all of us, that the roadmaps are already now in a way old. They're not valid yet. We have to maybe make a revision or a new roadmap, but yeah, what will really be funded is something that's suddenly catch the moment because someone do the work to get the people together and meet, and then suddenly something happens. And there, Gunnel, you have a role.
Well, I see it's a lot of people who want to say something, but I think that the question is wrongly posed. I think what it's all about here is a new mindset. We need this Nordic added value as a guide. And if we don't want to work or gain from working Nordic, we shouldn't do it. But where we can do more by working together, we cannot think, distribute it nationally. Instead, we should think Nordic, because I think research and knowledge has become increasingly important in the global knowledge societies where we are. And so we will all gain if we accomplish more together. It doesn't matter if this is in Norway and this is in Denmark, as long as we all get what we need back in terms of knowledge.
Several. I think actually Asbjørn was first. So if you would like to pass the mic, and then you can take turns. I know all you want to speak. So please, Asbjørn.
Me? Okay.
Yes, because I saw you waved
Yeah,
before
yes,
Peter
I did,
actually.
but,
So
no big deal. Of course, we've often been thought that there are no wrong questions, there are only wrong answers. So, of course, your question is not wrong, but it is perhaps not very realistic, the example you draw. But one of the direct answers to your direct question is that I think each country need to accept that, for example, in Norway, we have to accept that Norwegian researchers come and apply for investment in research infrastructure going on in another country, and vice versa. And I don't think that is the most complicated issue, and we are doing that to some extent already. But that's not the only thing here. And also, if you look to the S3 roadmap, most of these infrastructures are distributed. Only a few ones of them are localized, and one of them is the ESS, and one of the others is IceCat, except for that it has a complicated system with antennas, etc. But in principle, it's a located infrastructure. The same applies to MAX4. And for that reason, and since the focus presently is very close to these Swedish infrastructures, or those of them being constructed in Sweden, we somehow think that infrastructure is something localized, but it's not. It's mainly distributed. And then we have to look into how can we manage this together, and how can we fund it. And I come back to the operational cost, which is an Achilles heel, I think. First of all, we are all aware that some infrastructures are extremely expensive to run, but still we find it right to have them there. But that's not all of them. Quite many infrastructures have a reasonable operational cost, and with reasonable I mean that there is a huge amount of research going on that use this infrastructure, and so there is a comparable kind of fraction between how much research is going on and the infrastructure it needs to pay for, so to speak, in an operational cost way of thinking. And that being said, at least as a part of the Norwegian policy for funding research infrastructure, we are very eager to always tell our research communities that it is indeed an eligible cost, this operational cost, in any research project you are applying for. Come up with the cost of the operational cost, put it into your budget, and we will fund it if we fund the project. Of course, if the use of infrastructure is in proportion to what is being done, etc., etc. But I think this kind of awareness of what the cost is should be kind of common in the Nordic countries, actually in any country. But it needs to be common. And then you get an awareness of how worthwhile is it? And why should I do it at home if I can do it better and more specialized in another country? But the pricing policy, if I could use that word, should be more similar. This is what I have in mind when I'm talking about a more aligned or common research policy between the Nordic countries. Yes, thank you.
So I wanted to be provocative also. So if you really wanted to ruin the Nordic collaboration. Never send your students to another Nordic country. Never get them summer school or winter schools. Never try to network your research groups. So I think that the basis for good collaboration and policy must lie on a high quality research, and that the researchers wanted to work together. That's the first thing. And after that comes the questions, how can we pay together? We have a good example, for example, NordSync. It's a good example how we collaborate. And I think that the basis for that must be that the young researchers and the research groups has worked together.
Yes, Sven, please.
Yeah. I feel a bit awkward when I speak, because it's hard for me to speak on behalf of the Swedish Research Council. I have to look at Juni when I say something, and if she looks happy, I think I said the right thing. So in my opinion, then I agree with Peter that it's really hard to achieve a Nordic research infrastructure policy or a roadmap. I think the way to proceed is that when we make our national roadmaps, we should have the Nordic dimension in mind always, and perhaps single out a few of the infrastructures that we think in each country are suitable for Nordic collaboration. And then we could meet, all of us, and discuss common infrastructures and make prioritization among those. That seems to be the most efficient way.
Juni is nodding.
Thank you. Pass the mic down to Hallgrim.
Well, to close the circle, I agree with the others, actually. This is a provocative question, and well, this is not how we would do it anyway. But still, one of the questions you asked, moderator, was the sharing of research infrastructure, actually, in the beginning. And of course, that's at least our experience, that we are willing to share, and the other countries are willing to share infrastructure in the case you need that. And all this cooperation we have seen here over 2 days is an obvious thing in that respect. Well, I would like to refer to, if you look at Iceland and if there is an excellence there in science, I would mention 2 things, earth sciences and health sciences to a certain extent. Well, the health sciences might be more complicated to share everything due to business views, among other things. But if I take the earth sciences, glaciology, volcanology, plate tectonics, etc., where we have built up an excellent infrastructure, and that is we are willing to share with others, and do it certainly within there was a Nordic institution, Nordvulk, which was part of building up part of that. So there is no question, if there is a strength, we are willing to cooperate. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, question from the floor. Do we have a mic? Thank you.
Thank you. I will actually get to a different topic right now. Talk about an infrastructure that may not be an infrastructure, and still I've been sitting in the Danish Research Council and also shared a lot of moments with my Nordic colleagues. And we have a problem, at least in theory, with conflicts of interest in small countries when we actually evaluate our research proposals in the individual country. And for many years we have talked about, could we actually, in the Nordic, use each other and exchange that task between countries. Not only would that actually remove some of the conflict of interest, conflict of interest that could be there, but it would also increase our knowledge on what is going on in the other countries around us. So it would bind us together in a totally different way. So it would serve two purposes. I know it's not easy, but I'd like to actually ask the panel up here what their opinion on this would be.
Any views from the panel? Anyone wants to address this?
Good idea.
Thank you, Gunnel. Another question here?
Can I share an example?
Yes.
At Max IV Laboratory, we have to evaluate some 500 proposals every year. And we have review panels to do that. And the rule is that the head of the panel is from Sweden, but all the other members are not. So we do what you say, and it works excellently. It gives us more input and more breadth in the evaluation, and it spreads the news about our facility to other countries and other communities.
Thank you. Erland, you have a mic here.
A very short testimony along the same lines. In my research council, there has always been an effort to recruit as many Nordic experts as possible to our standing panels. And right now we are in the process of recruiting a large number of more Nordic experts and researchers. So you will have letters soon.
Thank you. We have one here from Betty. Oops.
Sorry about that. For those of you who weren't here at the social science panel, I'm a sociologist and demographer at Stockholm University and run the Linnaeus Center for Social Policy and Family Dynamics in Europe. And when you talk about groups who are already cooperating, there are tons and tons of us who have cross-Nordic relationships and do research. And I can tell you that Vetenskapsrådet is putting in a lot of money into register-based research, a lot of it in the social and economic sciences. And I know that the Norwegian Research Council and I know that the Finnish Academy of Sciences is putting a lot of money in. And if we had one platform, you could get 10 times the amount of work out of it. Now, it would require the cooperation of the law and the ethical issues and the review. The technology must be completely simple. But instead, we each go to get our own funding, we each go to our own ethic review, we don't even have a common metadata because it is so hard to do it jointly. You would get an immediate construction of comparative metadata on all of the register variables that many of us use. We would discover lots of discrepancies that we don't really know about now because we're doing it independently. We can't do the best science because we can't put the data together and do the tests often, some of the statistical tests we need to look at cross data. For example, with logistic regression, we have to have all the data together, and we can't do that. So from a funding point of view, it would seem like a really good deal if you could work toward this kind of cooperation, at least in my field.
Thank you. Short comment from the panel, which will be the last comment in that case, or perhaps we can conclude that perhaps toppforskningsinitiativet for register-based research is the next step to go, perhaps? Just trying it. Thank you very much, panel. I think there was a really good discussion where all the questions that I raised in the beginning were touched upon by you, by yourselves. You were doing your job well. I would like to introduce the next speaker, which is Katarina Bjelke from the Ministry of Education and Research, Division for Research Policy. Ja.
So, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's getting dark outside, but I must say it has been enlightening in here this afternoon, really. Research infrastructures and the use of them are important for all countries having an ambition to create good or even excellent research environment to support researchers and also research of high quality. It gives opportunities that goes beyond what a single researcher or group can do on their own. Attractive research infrastructures draws the best researchers from all over, creating interesting projects and new collaborations. It is an essential tool for addressing grand challenges. It develops society, creates new knowledge, educates people, and creates new innovations. Some of the research infrastructures even lower the employment figures while being built in the region. And hearing this, if I were a politician, which I'm not, I would immediately invest a lot of money into research infrastructures. And this is actually what many countries are doing. And the Swedish government has done in its last 2 bills to Parliament on research and innovation. They have prioritized, for example, which we heard about these 2 days, registers, which are important in all Nordic countries, MAX4, the synchrotron, ESS, and also SciLife Lab, the Stockholm region. The downside, or I can say the challenge with research infrastructures for all countries is that some research infrastructures are expensive. In some cases, even extremely expensive. Another challenge is that expertise in some areas are rare to find in one single country. On top of that, as we also heard from the discussion panel, we have different rules and regulations, for example, within registries, databases, and biobanks. Sketching this background, it is important to take advantage of the prioritized research infrastructures that has been and will be built. And in order to do so, we need to pool our expertise, knowledge, and also investments in order to develop and take best use of these facilities. We need to work together in order to make it easy to get access, to be informed about the possibilities, and get education out to prospective users in the whole of society. The individual Nordic countries are successful in research and innovation, but also, considering their size, vulnerable. So Nordic cooperation within this area is important in order for us to be stronger and more attractive partners. Having facilities and networks in the vicinity is an added value for the Nordic region. This is why research infrastructure was decided as one important theme for this year's Swedish chairmanship of the Nordic Council of Ministers, and also why it has been so important to arrange this conference. I'm quite convinced that I don't have to convince you all of how important research infrastructure is. Anyhow, this conference has spanned a wide range of important topics related to research infrastructures with the expressed aim to identify the potential for future Nordic collaboration on research infrastructures and to take the existing collaborations to yet a higher level. We have heard the concrete mission statements that have been produced within the conference workshop from all 5 areas covered: training, education, science, e-infrastructure, the climate and environment, health and welfare, materials and molecules. We also heard a very interesting discussion with representative of national and Nordic funders of research infrastructures. Not always having the same mind on things, but interesting to hear. I feel that some actions stands out as extra vital, actions where Nordic collaboration could truly make a real difference. First of all, in order to foster new generation of research infrastructure users in specific areas, a joint Nordic effort on education and training is needed. This, we feel, should be coordinated by Nordforsk in close collaboration with the Nordic countries and their respective funders of research infrastructure. Secondly, producing a sort of map showing what research infrastructures are available in the Nordic area. This would greatly facilitate for researchers wanting to conduct their research with the benefit of Nordic research infrastructure. Such a roadmap, or map, I would say, because roadmap is a word that is we have a lot of definitions of that word, so I would say more a map would be coordinated and managed also by Nordforsk. And I feel that someone asked if there was a way to increase knowledge on what is going on in the Nordic countries, and that would be one way of having this map. The mission statements produced within this conference workshops, together with output from discussions carried out during the conference, will after the conference be fed into an overall conference statement by the organizers of the conference. That is the Nordic Council of Ministers, the Swedish Research of Ministry of Education and Research, and also the Swedish Research Council and Nordforsk. Let me conclude by saying the area of research infrastructure is truly, truly important, and it is clearly prioritized by the responsible stakeholders, the national and Nordic funders of research infrastructures. So, last but not least, on behalf of the Swedish Ministry of Education and Research, I would like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to the ones that have made this very important and very timely conference possible. The Nordic Council of Ministers, Nordforsk, the Swedish Research Council. So thank you very much to you all. And now I leave the word again to Eva Stensköld.
Just a few closing words of gratitude to mainly Katarina thanked everybody, and I would also like to take the opportunity to thank everybody who has made this conference possible, all of you attending this, the keynote speakers, the session chairs, everybody listening in, chipping in, having comments, and not forgetting the ones that are actually listening to this, looking at this on the streaming, because we also have this streamed live. So also a word of gratitude to the organizers that Katarina mentioned, but and I will not mention you by name because I will forget someone, but I will like one person to get up on the stage, and that is Katarina from the Swedish Research Council, please. Without you, this would not have happened. Thank you. You have done a fantastic job. So, you can now leave and go back home. And do not forget that you will have to be back here in 5 years' time. Thank you.